When I called my daughter to ask what time the memorial service started, she picked up on the first ring. That itself should have told me something. She never picks up on the first ring. "Dad," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "We decided to keep it very private, just immediate family. You would find it too overwhelming." I told her I was immediate family. Her husband's voice floated in from the background, low and deliberate. "Let him rest, Claire. You know how he gets." A week later, they showed up at my door with paperwork and soft smiles, expecting to find a grieving old man who had forgotten where he left his reading glasses. They found something else entirely. Before I tell you what they found, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever had someone mistake your silence for surrender, hit like and subscribe, because this story is for you. My name is Raymond Cole. I am 71 years old. For 34 years, I was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. I have held beating hearts in my hands. I have repaired what most people believed was beyond repair. I tell you this not to brag, but because it matters. When you have spent 3 decades making life or death decisions in the space of a single breath, you develop a particular relationship with clarity. You learn to see exactly what is in front of you, not what you wish were there. My wife, Dorothy, died on a Tuesday in March. Congestive heart failure, the cruelest irony for a man who spent his life fixing other people's hearts. We had 42 years together. She was a librarian who read 3 books a week and made the best lemon pound cake in Middlesex County. The house still smells like her sometimes, when the wind comes through the kitchen window at the right angle. I am not ashamed to say that I stood at that window for an hour the morning after she passed, just breathing. The funeral home called me Thursday to confirm the arrangements. I had planned everything myself. Dorothy had been specific about what she wanted. A small service at St. Andrews, white roses, the choir singing "Be Thou My Vision." Simple, honest, like her. So when my daughter called me Saturday morning, 3 days after Dorothy died, to tell me the service had been moved and that I should stay home and rest, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet in a way that had nothing to do with grief. I drove to St. Andrews anyway. The parking lot was full. There were catering vans parked along the side street. Through the tall wooden doors, I could hear voices, laughter even, the kind that comes after a second glass of wine. I walked up the stone steps in the same charcoal suit I had worn to my medical school graduation 50 years ago. The usher at the door was a young man I didn't recognize. He looked at the program in his hand, then at my face, then back at the program. "Sir, are you on the list?" he asked. I was on the list. I was on the original list. My name was Raymond Cole, and my wife was in a mahogany casket 30 feet away, and I was being asked if I was on the list. I stepped inside without answering him. What I saw stopped me at the threshold. The pews were full, not with Dorothy's friends from the library, not with our neighbors from the 40 years we lived on Elm Grove Street, but with people I barely recognized. Business contacts of my son-in-law's, colleagues from the financial firm where he worked. My daughter was at the front in a black dress that cost more than my first car, standing next to a flower arrangement so large it nearly obscured the casket. She was networking. At her mother's funeral, she was handing out business cards. She saw me. For a fraction of a second, something crossed her face. Not guilt, calculation. She walked toward me quickly, her heels clicking against the stone floor. "Dad, I told you to stay home. You look exhausted." She took my arm like she was guiding a patient, not welcoming a father. This got a little bigger than planned. Derek's colleagues insisted on paying their respects, and it just snowballed. "We'll have a private moment later. Just us." I looked past her at the casket. Dorothy had wanted white roses. There were red ones. She had wanted the choir. There was a string quartet playing something I didn't recognize. Everything about this service had been changed, polished, repackaged into an event that served one purpose. My son-in-law was using my wife's death as a networking opportunity, and my daughter was letting him. I turned and walked back out the door. I drove home slowly, taking the long way along the river. The water was gray and flat, and it matched the feeling spreading through my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. Sadness was what I had felt standing at the kitchen window. This was different. This was the cold, Focused attention I used to feel in surgery when I realized the situation was worse than the scans had indicated. It was the feeling that precedes action. I have a particular friend named Walter Grimes. We went to medical school together. He became an estate attorney instead of a physician, which he says was the smarter choice, and which I suspect is true. I called him from my driveway before I even got out of the car. "I need you to look at something," I said when he answered. "Raymond," he said, because he knew my voice. "What happened?" "I don't know yet, but something did." He came over that evening with a yellow legal pad and a thermos of coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table until midnight. I showed him Dorothy's will, the original, which I had written with him 15 years ago, held in the safe behind the bookshelf in my study. It was clear. The house to me, the retirement accounts to me, a modest trust for our granddaughter Emma to cover her medical school tuition, and after I passed, everything divided between my daughter and Emma. Walter read it twice, then he set it down. "Have you seen the probate filing?" he asked. I had not. He pulled up the county records on his laptop. What I found there made me set down my coffee cup very carefully, because my hands had started to shake. 3 days after Dorothy died, someone had filed a different will for probate, not the original. A new document, dated 8 months prior, leaving the house, the accounts, and the trust fund in joint control of my daughter and my son-in-law. My portion was reduced to a monthly allowance, described in the document as living expenses for Raymond Cole during his period of cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. Those 2 words again, in my life, like a bad recurring dream. Attached to the filing was a letter signed by a Dr. Philip Strand, asserting that I had been evaluated and found to exhibit early-stage dementia, making me unfit to manage significant assets. I have never been evaluated by anyone named Philip Strand. I looked him up that night. He had a website. It was built in the last 6 months and had no verified credentials, no hospital affiliation, no professional licensing board listing. He was a ghost with a letterhead. I looked at Walter. He looked at me. He had been my friend for 40 years. He knew exactly who I was. He had watched me diagnose problems other surgeons had missed. He had watched me stay calm in rooms where other men fell apart. "How long have they been planning this?" I asked. Walter's jaw was tight. Based on the document date and the time it took to register Dr. Strand, I'd say at least 8 months, possibly a year. Dorothy had been sick for 14 months. I sat with that for a moment. My daughter had watched her mother get sicker and, somewhere in that time, had started building the architecture of this theft. Or my son-in-law had. Or both. It didn't matter who had the idea first. What mattered was that they had let it grow. I went to my study. I opened the safe and took out everything. Not just the will, the deed to the house, the account statements, the trust documents for Emma's education fund. I stacked them on the desk, and I went through them line by line, the way I used to review a patient's full chart before a complex procedure. You don't assume, you verify. That was when I found the second crime. Emma's trust fund had been established the year she was born. It held enough for 4 years of medical school, comfortable but not extravagant. I had funded it from my surgical practice. It was untouchable, in theory, without my signature and a co-trustee's approval. The co-trustee I had named, 21 years ago, was my daughter. She had made a withdrawal 6 weeks earlier. $280,000, gone. I sat very still at my desk for a long time. Outside the window, the maple tree Dorothy had planted the year we moved in was beginning to bud. She had been proud of that tree. She used to say it was proof that patience produced beauty. I looked at it, and I made a decision. I was not going to call my daughter. I was not going to confront my son-in-law. I was not going to do the thing they expected a grieving, disoriented old man to do, which was to stumble into their trap and sign whatever they put in front of me. I was going to do what I had done every time a surgery looked impossible. I was going to slow down, gather information, and cut precisely. Walter worked through the weekend. By Monday morning, he had a forensic document examiner reviewing the forged will, a private investigator pulling financial records on my son-in-law's firm, and a motion ready to file challenging the probate. He also had something I hadn't asked for but immediately understood was essential. He had located Emma. She was in her 2nd year at Boston University, pre-med, living in a dorm on Commonwealth Avenue. She didn't know any of this was happening. Her parents had told her the trust fund was being restructured for tax purposes. She had accepted that explanation because she trusted her mother. I drove to the campus on a Tuesday afternoon and waited near the science building. When I saw her walking out with a backpack over one shoulder and a coffee in her hand, looking so much like Dorothy at 20 that it physically hurt, I honked twice. She ran to the car. She hadn't been to the service. She had been told it was a private family affair and that she could pay her respects privately later. She had believed that too. When she slid into the passenger seat and looked at me, she didn't look like a girl who had been protected. She looked like someone who had been managed. "Grandpa," she said. "Why wasn't I at Grandma's funeral?" "That is exactly what I am trying to find out," I said. I didn't tell her everything that day. I told her enough. I told her that her tuition fund had been accessed without my knowledge. I watched her face move through confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, cold understanding that was older than her years. She was her grandmother's granddaughter. She did not scream or cry. She sat quietly and asked me what she should do. "Do nothing," I said. "Go to class. Answer your mother's calls normally. Tell her nothing has changed. Can you do that?" She looked at me. "I'm going to be a surgeon," she said. "I know how to keep a steady hand." I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt since Dorothy died. Purpose. The following days moved with a quiet efficiency that must have looked, from the outside, like a grieving man keeping himself busy. I went to the bank. Not the branch my daughter used, but the main downtown branch, where I had banked for 32 years and where the branch manager, a man named Harold Fisk, had once been a patient of mine. I sat in his office, and I told him what I had found. I watched his face go from professional concern to genuine alarm when I showed him the withdrawal slip on Emma's trust. The signature was mine, expertly forged, the same looping R in Raymond that I had written without a tail for the last 15 years. Whoever copied it had used a document from the early years of the trust, when I still wrote the letter differently. Harold froze the remaining assets attached to any account bearing my name. He flagged the fraudulent withdrawal for the fraud division. He printed me everything. I went next to the county recorder's office and filed a formal challenge to the probate proceeding, supported by the original will, Walter's forensic analysis, and an affidavit from my personal physician, Dr. Annette Park, who had seen me monthly for a decade and was prepared to testify in considerable detail about the full functioning of my mind. Then I did something my daughter and my son-in-law had not anticipated, because they thought they were dealing with a man made soft by grief. A man who had loved too generously for too long and forgotten how to fight. They forgot that the same love that makes a man gentle also makes him immovable when it counts. I called Emma's college financial aid office. I explained that I was the sole funding source for her education, and that due to an ongoing legal dispute, I needed to establish a new direct payment agreement, bypassing the existing trust structure entirely. The new agreement would send payments directly from an account my daughter had no access to. An account I had opened that morning at a different bank entirely, funded by a bond portfolio I had kept separately for 30 years. Dorothy had known about it. No one else did. Emma's tuition was secured. Whatever happened next, she was safe. On Thursday, 11 days after Dorothy's funeral, my daughter and my son-in-law came to the house. They called first this time. I knew they were coming because Walter had told me that the probate court had sent a notice of challenge to their attorney. They would have received it that morning. They would be worried. They would want to manage me before it went further. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I waited. They came in through the front door with the particular energy of people who have rehearsed their entrance. My son-in-law was wearing a suit. On a Thursday morning, he carried a leather portfolio under his arm. My daughter wore a concerned expression that did not reach her eyes. "Dad," she said, sitting across from me. "We need to talk about what's been happening." I poured coffee. I said nothing. My son-in-law opened the portfolio. He had documents. He slid them across the table. "Raymond, there's been a miscommunication. The will that was filed was a draft that Dorothy asked us to hold. It reflects her final wishes, which she communicated privately because she was concerned about your capacity to manage the estate alone. She was protecting you." I looked at the documents. I looked at my son-in-law's face. He was a handsome man. compact and well-dressed, with the confident posture of someone who had spent years selling things that weren't worth buying. She was protecting me, I repeated. You've had some difficult moments since the diagnosis, my daughter said carefully. The confusion, the forgetting. We've noticed, Dad. We've been worried. I have not had a diagnosis. I have no confusion. I wake up every morning, make my bed with hospital corners, the way I was taught in 1976, do the crossword in ink, and remember every patient I have ever lost. My memory for faces is so precise that it has sometimes been a burden. I remember every wrong thing every person has ever done in my presence. I remember, for instance, that my son-in-law, 3 Christmases ago, told a story at dinner about a real estate investment that had temporary liquidity issues. I remember asking him a series of quiet questions about it and watching the answers not quite add up. I remember filing that away the way you file a symptom that doesn't fit the current diagnosis. Not urgent, but not forgotten. Tell me about the money from Emma's trust, I said. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. My daughter's hands, wrapped around her coffee cup, went still. My son-in-law's posture shifted, something tightening across his shoulders. He looked at my daughter. She looked at the table. That was a temporary reallocation, he said. Emma's trust was sitting in a low-yield account. I moved it into a growth vehicle that will return significantly more by the time she needs it for residency. It was a sound decision. It was not your decision to make, I said. My voice was very calm. I had used this voice in the operating room when a resident made an error. It was the voice of a man who was not raising his volume because he did not need to. The trust requires 2 trustees. You are not a trustee. My daughter is a trustee, and the original agreement requires her to consult with me on any disbursement over $5,000. $280,000 left that account without my knowledge. Dad, you were in no state to be consulted, my daughter said. Mom had just died. We were protecting you. Stop saying that word, I said. She blinked. You are not protecting me. You are stealing from me and from my granddaughter, and you are using my wife's death as cover. I picked up my coffee cup. I want you to know that I filed a challenge to the probate on Tuesday. I want you to know that the bank has flagged the trust withdrawal as fraud, and I want you to know that Walter Grimes has a motion before a judge this afternoon to freeze all jointly held assets pending a full forensic review. My son-in-law stood up. His chair scraped hard against the tile. You have no idea what you are doing. That money is already invested. You can't pull it back without destroying the position. You will lose half of it. He pointed at me. This is exactly the kind of impulsive, irrational decision-making we were trying to prevent. You are not well, Raymond. You need to let us handle this. I looked at his pointing finger. I looked at it for a long moment. Sit down, I said quietly. He did not sit down. He kept his finger raised, his face reddening. He was the kind of man who mistook volume for authority. He said several things, each one louder than the last, about my mental state, about Dorothy's wishes, about the investment vehicle he had supposedly selected, about the trouble I was causing for the family, about what I was doing to my daughter. My daughter was crying, or performing crying. I was no longer certain which. I stood up. I am 6'1", and I have maintained my weight within 5 pounds of what it was when I graduated medical school. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood, and something about the way I did it, the steadiness of it, made my son-in-law stop talking. You forged my wife's will, I said. You forged my signature on a trust withdrawal. You fabricated a medical diagnosis to override my legal standing. And you excluded me from my wife's funeral service so you could use her memory to impress your business contacts. I walked to the front door and opened it. The police will want to speak with you. I suggest you find an attorney before they call. My daughter stopped performing. She looked at me with real fear now, stripped of everything else. Dad, please, this has gotten out of hand. We can fix this. Just withdraw the probate challenge. Let us explain everything to you properly, and we can fix this. The only thing I am fixing, I said, is what you have broken. They left. My son-in-law said something on the way down the porch steps that I chose not to hear. My daughter looked back at me once, And I saw in that look something I recognized from her childhood. She was 11 years old again, caught lying about where she had been, and she was calculating whether there was still a way out. There wasn't. What happened over the next 10 days was not dramatic in the way of movies. It was quiet, methodical, and irreversible, the way that surgery is quiet and methodical when it is done well. Walter filed the motions. The forensic examiner submitted her report to the probate court, confirming the will was forged. The signature on the trust withdrawal was traced to a document from a loan application my son-in-law had filed 7 years ago, where he had practiced copying my signature as a guarantor. The investigator Walter hired found that my son-in-law's growth vehicle was a private equity fund with no SEC registration and a principal who was under investigation in 2 states. The $280,000 from Emma's trust had been used to cover margin calls on my son-in-law's personal investment account. He had been losing money for 3 years. He had built the entire fiction of their comfortable life on borrowed leverage and delayed consequences. My daughter, it emerged, knew some of it. Not all of it. She had chosen not to know all of it, which the law treats with a specific unkindness. Dr. Philip Strand, whose fraudulent certification had declared me cognitively impaired, was found to be a former insurance adjuster who had purchased a medical degree from an unaccredited institution online. His letter was not simply inadmissible. It was evidence of a separate crime. On a Friday morning, 3 weeks after Dorothy's funeral, I stood on my front porch in the same charcoal suit and watched 2 unmarked sedans park in front of my house. Detectives. Not for me. They walked past me with a courtesy nod and knocked on the door of the house across the street, where my daughter and son-in-law had been staying since their lease ended. I had known they were there. I had said nothing. My son-in-law was arrested at the door in his bathrobe. My daughter came outside 2 minutes later, and she looked across the street at me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. It was not hate. Hate takes energy. It was a look of total, devastating comprehension. She finally understood, completely, that I had not been confused, that I had never been confused, that every day she had spent building her story around my supposed incompetence, I had been watching and waiting and building a different kind of structure entirely. She did not call out to me. I did not go to her. There are moments in life that are simply what they are, and no gesture softens them. Emma drove up that afternoon in her second-hand Honda. She had heard from Walter. She parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, and I walked down the porch steps to meet her. She got out of the car, and we stood in the front yard, under the maple tree Dorothy had planted, and she did not cry. She is not a woman who cries easily, which she gets from her grandmother. "Is the tuition still intact?" she asked. "All 4 years," I said. "Medical school, residency stipend, and a buffer. It is in a trust that neither of your parents can touch. Walter is the co-trustee now." She nodded. She looked at the maple tree. "Grandma would have hated all of this," she said. "She would have hated the dishonesty," I said. "She would have understood the rest." Emma stayed for dinner. I made Dorothy's lemon chicken, which I have been slowly getting right over the past several years, though it is never quite the same. We sat at the kitchen table and talked for a long time about her classes and her professors and the research lab she was hoping to join in the fall. We talked about the patients I remembered. We talked about Dorothy. We did not talk about her parents, because some evenings are not for that. My son-in-law pleaded guilty to wire fraud and forgery 8 weeks later. He received 40 months in federal prison and a restitution order for the full amount of the trust withdrawal. The equity fund he had sunk the money into was already under federal receivership. There would likely be a partial recovery. It would not be enough to cover everything, but the retirement accounts were intact and the house was still mine, clear of any fraudulent liens that Walter had unwound in a remarkable 7 days of legal precision. My daughter received a suspended sentence in exchange for her cooperation and testimony. She moved to Portland to stay with a college friend. She called me once, 2 months later, from an unknown number. I picked up. She said she was sorry. I believed that she was, in the specific way that people are sorry when the consequences of a thing become real. We did not speak for long. I told her that when she was ready to have a different kind of conversation, I would answer the phone. She has not called since. I expect she will, someday. I will wait with the particular patience of a man who has no illusions left to protect and no need to rush. Emma graduated from Boston University that spring with honors. She was accepted to her first-choice medical school. I drove her to orientation in September, and when we pulled up to the building, she took the PC watch off her wrist, the simple field watch I had given her on her 21st birthday, and she turned it over in her hands for a moment. "When I get my MD," she said, "I want you to be there." "I will be there," I said. "Nobody will tell me otherwise." She smiled and got out of the car. I watched her walk toward the entrance with her backpack and her spine straight and her grandmother's calm in her face. I watched until she went through the doors, and then I sat in the car for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. The morning after Dorothy died, I had stood at the kitchen window, breathing in the last traces of her presence and trying to understand how to continue. I had not understood yet. I understand better now. You continue the way she would have continued. You fix what can be fixed. You let go of what cannot be saved. You plant things that take longer than a single season to bloom, and you trust the patience you have built over a lifetime of steady, careful work. I drive past Street Andrews sometimes when I go to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. The maple in the front yard is getting tall now. Dorothy would have liked that too. She always said the best things grow when nobody is watching them too closely. The house on Elm Grove Street is quiet, but it is not empty. Emma comes for dinner on Sundays when she is not studying. Walter comes for chess on Tuesday evenings. I make Dorothy's lemon pound cake on Saturday mornings, and I am getting closer. Not the same, but closer. Some people have asked me whether I regret how hard I pushed, whether a man my age should spend his final years in courtrooms and conflict instead of resting. I understand the question. I do not agree with its premise. A doctor does not stop operating because the surgery is difficult. A builder does not abandon a structure because the foundation was compromised by someone who should have known better. You go in. You do the work. You restore what can be restored and you accept what cannot. And then you walk out into the light and you breathe. My name is Raymond Cole. I am a builder, and the ground is level now. If you watch this far, I want to ask you something in the comments. Has someone in your life ever mistaken your patience for weakness? And what did you do about it? If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe. Until next time, protect the people who cannot yet protect themselves, and do not ever let anyone tell you that your silence means you are not paying attention. Sometimes it just means you are waiting for the right moment to speak.